All right, everyone. Welcome to the workshop, um, um, one of the Korean development workshop series. Today, we're going to talk about GitHub. If you do not know of GitHub, it's okay because we're gonna learn a thing or two today. If you know already, hopefully you will learn something new with the help of our guest speaker, James Johnson, grad student, and our in-house coding guru. James, please get started by, introducing GitHub and the layout or the outline of today's workshop.
Yeah. So for those of you who I may not have crossed paths with in the past, I'm James. I'm a fourth year grad student in the astronomy department. So part of my work has been developing and releasing a chemical evolution software for galaxies, and so in doing that, I've had to familiarize myself with a lot of GitHub's internal all the intricacies of using GitHub. So today we'll cover mostly just the basics. If you don't have an account already, in the next few minutes, just go ahead and click on the link that I put in the chat. It's just github.com/join. So pretty straightforward URL, and go ahead and make an account. It's free. If you want to keep your code private, you'll need a pro account, but otherwise GitHub is free to use. I am pretty sure that Bitbucket Bitbucket is another website that does more or less the same thing, and I'm fairly certain that the usage is also more or less the same. But at the end of the day, I'm a GitHub user and not a Bitbucket user. So today's workshop will mostly focus on on GitHub, and I'll just echo the comment from Joshua in the chat. GitHub Pro is apparently free for students. So if you want a pro one, I guess if you have an .edu account, you can do that. So in the meantime, what really is GitHub is it's really just a website where you can store copies of files. And, it doesn't have to be code. You can put files of really any format on GitHub. So that means for us as researchers, it's a particularly useful tool because if you've got multiple computers, you can use it to manage all of the copies of your code between your computers. Like, for example, I've got a laptop, a desktop in my apartment, and a desktop in my office, and so GitHub makes it really easy to just take all of my code and treat the copy that's on GitHub as the master copy, and then I just do all of the editing on whatever computer I'm working on, and then I just push my changes at the end of the day, and I don't have to worry about, say, sending files from computer to computer to make sure that I've got the most up-to-date version of whatever I worked on. I just simply have to pull changes at the beginning, and it takes like a second. So it was originally designed for a version control tool for software development. So there's a whole bunch of really fancy things you can do with it. But at the end of the day, if your interest is just simply managing your workflow, you really only need kind of the basics of how to make a repository and how to push changes and pull changes. So I guess without further ado, I'll sort of assume from here on that everyone's got an account by now. If you need another minute or two, speak up now. Another advantage of GitHub, as well, is that some text editors have a built-in integration for the Git command line tool, so that you don't have to really even leave your text editor to push your changes to the cloud. But if you have a terminal, pull that up and just type Git with an I, just GIT, and that will just to make sure that you've got the command line tool Git. For most of the demonstration, I'll be using that, and it's I think it's, in my opinion at least, it's the easiest way to send files to and from the cloud. Like I said, if you have a text editor, though, some text editors can do it from there. So other than a terminal and a GitHub account, all you'll need is an internet connection, which if you're in the workshop, you need that anyway. So let's go ahead and get started. So so the first step in making a repository is to go to your profile on GitHub.
James, would you mind sharing your screen so that people can see what you are doing and follow you step by step?
Yes, I'm getting there. 1 sec. I need you to let me screen share, G.
You should be able to do that now.
Okay, thank you. So once you're signed in on GitHub, you should see something like this. If it's not this page, if it's not this exact page, don't worry. Basically, all you need is to go into the upper right and click on your profile. So just go to basically this page. You'll see something like this. If you have a new account, you won't see any repositories here. But I've went ahead and made an example yesterday. So there's screenshots of my basically my browser window and my terminal and various combinations thereof and how I did that. But I'll take everyone through that process again today. But nonetheless, all of the notes on how to do so can be found in here as well. And I'll leave this up for indefinitely. So just go up here and click on repositories. And you'll see any repositories that you may have created if you already had an account, or if you've got a new account, this page should be blank. And you'll just click on new in the upper right up here. And by the way, everyone, if you need another minute or so or have a question, just speak up. We want to make sure everyone's having an adequate time to be hands-on. So basically what's going on here is we're making the online version of the repository. So if step one is to create the online repository, step two would be to create your local copy of the repository. And then once you've pushed a file to a repository, there's one last thing you need to do, which is establish the connection between your local copy and the online copy. And once that's done, you can essentially add, commit, push, and pull between your repository very, very easily. So on this page, basically the only required thing is to give your repository a name. So I'll just call this example. And you can call it whatever you want. If you don't necessarily have any need for a repository at the moment, you can make some example as well. And I'll just mention too that you can delete repositories. So if you just want to follow along with the process, make some dummy repository, and at the end of the day, just get rid of it, you can do that as well. The rest of this is all optional. The only required thing is the name. But I'll just go ahead and give this some description. Just say this is some example repository. If you've got a pro account, you can make it private. The rest of this, if you don't need to do a README right now, you don't need to do a git ignore or a license right now. All of those can be added later just by adding a file as you would any other file. So if you don't necessarily know what to do here, and I would say for demonstration purposes, let's just skip the README and the git ignore for now. So now you just click on create repository. And this should take you to a page that looks something like this. If we've all made a new repository, so there shouldn't be any files in here. And GitHub is giving us a couple different ways that we can push files to our new empty repository. But I'm going to take you through this one on top here, because this is, I think, the easiest way to do it. There is a program called GitHub Desktop, which I think is that's what this button is for up here. If you want to go through on a program with a user interface to push and pull files from GitHub, you can do that. But nonetheless, since it is another program in and of itself, I used it once in undergrad and found that there was something of a learning curve with GitHub Desktop in and of itself, whereas I was already comfortable with the command line. So just simply using these commands is, in my opinion, at least the simplest way to do it, especially if you're already comfortable with the Unix terminal. So basically, all this is doing. I'm just going to break this down step by step. And if you want to go ahead and go through some of this process, feel free. The one thing you need to be aware of is that you need a directory in your computer for the repository to live in. So before you push or anything, just run a makedir command, mkdir, on the command line, and make some directory for this repository to live in. It makes sense to give it the same name as your repository. So if I called this repository example, I would make a directory called example. And that's just an easy way for yourself to keep track of which directories in your computer correspond to which GitHub repositories. So within that directory, all this is doing is creating some file. They just simply put the string # example into some file called readme.md, and it doesn't have to be readme.md. It can just be any file. This is just adding some file with some text to that directory locally. The next thing this does is git init, and if you run an ls command after running git init, you'll find that there's a new directory on your local copy called .git. And within that directory is essentially everything that GitHub or the Git command line needs in order to establish the connection between your local copy and the online version. So all of that is made automatically for you just with this git init command. The rest of this deals with getting this new file onto your new repository. So first, you add the file. You tell Git that you want this file to go to GitHub, and then you have to commit, and you just give it some message. So the commit, this -m is not required. It's just a simple way to say that I'm making a commit and this is the message that I want the commit to have. You can just type git commit and it will just automatically open Vim, I think, is the text editor it opens in, and it will and you can just enter some commit message at the very top. And then as soon as you quit the file, the commit will run. After you commit, there's this Git Remote Add origin.
So James, I encountered with a problem.
Yes.
So it's I made a directory in my Box account, which is not on the local, like a local volume of a computer.
Okay.
And it says fatal, unable to auto detect email address. Got my dot number. So I guess I have to do it at a local volume so that it doesn't encounter with this problem.
Potentially, I would. So there's one thing I would try before moving everything. I need to pull up my chat to see. So I'll put a line in the chat here, G, and and tell me what the output is.
Chat. Okay.
So that's 2 dashes before global. The Zoom chat just wanted to make that a long dash. So for anyone who may have seen something like this command will just print the email that you have attached to GitHub. If you haven't used it on your computer yet, it's possible that you need to connect your email to your GitHub or to your local copy of Git. Basically, it needs an email address in order to be able to push it. It needs to know basically what account to push from. So G, once you've ran that, let me know what the output is.
So this is what I get. So my Gmail account is the one that is connected to the GitHub. So I just use this command line that you send.
Wait, so did you so don't replace user.email, just leave that as user.email.
Okay. All right. I didn't get any problem. Now I can try commit.
Did it print your WJ198414 at Gmail?
Nope. I just did nothing.
Okay. So I think it should probably print an email. So try now basically the same command. I'm putting the modification in the chat. If you just add your email on the end of that, I think it should set that to your it should set that variable for you.
All right.
If this doesn't work, if it still yells at you for after the commit, I would assume then that the problem is Dropbox.
Okay, now if I run git config -- global user.email, I got my Gmail.
Okay, good. Yeah, so try git commit now and let me know if you still get the same error.
Okay, good. I think I got my first commit in.
Awesome. So I guess so it sounds like you can do a repository in Dropbox then. I hadn't thought of doing that before.
So would you care to explain like what this means? Like first commit,
sure.
Create a mode, and what does that number means when you make a commit? Yeah. Is that like a tracing number or something?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so the message essentially just means the first thing you see is bracket master root commit this, and then just some nonsense and first commit. So first it says master because the default branch of a Git repository is master. If people are interested, we can talk about branches at the end of the workshop. But the basic idea is that within a repository, you can make as many branches as you want, and a branch is just a different copy of your code, and some may be more developed, some may be less developed, and it's more of a version control tool than a file management tool, because if you look at a repository for say an open source software, like my own open source software, or even within Anaconda, a lot of Anaconda code is a lot of that source code is hosted on GitHub as well. You'll find that they have many branches hosting many versions of their code. They'll have their default branch, the master, which is usually the code that is about to get released in the next version. And then they'll have a development branch and an experimental branch, and branches for various upcoming versions as well. And they're really just different copies of the code. But when you first make a repository, all you've got is the master branch. and that's just that's just essentially you've made an empty repository. It has a master branch and nothing else, and the master branch is there just for you to have a branch to push to, because you need at least one, or else you can't push to the repository. So the word master just means you're pushing to your master branch. If you're not creating multiple branches, then you will always see the word master there. It says root commit. I'm assuming because this is the first commit. That middle piece isn't necessarily of meaning to us. The numbers essentially are just some, I would say, like a hex code for GitHub to use as some like ID for that commit. So all of this is more or less irrelevant to us, except for the word master.
Yeah, I have run into this issue on GitHub. I was trying to look for a specific commit, because people have done different things on the code, and I want to look for a specific version, right? So they usually have a version ID that is associated with that specific commit. So is it this E5C thing here, or is 100644 that is associated with it?
That would be the E5CA9F7.
Okay.
That'd be the commit ID.
And on GitHub, if you want to look for that specific one, like how do you do that practically?
That's a great question. Let me actually pivot to my already created example repository as opposed to the one I'm doing now, and I will show you. So is everyone seeing my example repo here?
Yep.
So here, if you're basically on the landing page for a repository, you should see right here this message for the number of commits you have. And so you should be able to just click on this, and you can see all of the commits that you created. And here's all of the hex codes associated with them as well. And you can simply just click on them, and it will show you the file that's changed and all of the additions or subtractions from files. So what you can do is simply, you can look at files on certain commits and find the changes that you made and revert those changes if need be. You can also find the commit ID, and if need be, you can revert your repository to a specific commit. I would exercise caution in doing that, and if you decide to do that though, because oftentimes if you revert a repository to a given commit, if that commit is far in the past, I believe it would undo all of the changes between then and now. So the reason being is a branch is essentially just a pointer to a commit. If anyone has any experience in like C programming, a pointer is just like a memory address. And so if you have a branch, which is really just a pointer to a commit, and suddenly you point it at a completely different commit, it doesn't know what changes to keep and what changes to revert. So it just simply points your repository at some earlier state. The safer thing to do is to simply look at the changes that were made that you want undone, and simply modify them manually. So, does that answer your question, G?
Yeah. Yep.
Perfect.
Yeah. The reason why I'm asking is that we use our Python, and then sometimes our code only works for a specific version, and then we updated something. Suddenly, the code doesn't work anymore. So
Right.
we want to go back to a specific version so that our code is compatible with a specific version that is available on GitHub. So that's why I want to say which ID is associated with that specific commit.
That's another great feature of GitHub for research is that it stores these previous versions of all of your code. every time you make a commit and push, it stores all of those changes. So you don't have to keep old copies of your code yourself if you find that something doesn't work anymore, and you're not quite sure why, but the file that was changed and sort of where the change was, but you can't quite recall the previous state of the code. You can just go scrolling through your commits and find the commit where that file was changed. So you can keep your workflow much more organized by not having to to keep hold of old versions. So now I'll return to this now, so that we can get an explanation of what else is going on. So I think we left off here, which was just the first commit, and the next line was this remote add origin line. So what this does is it establishes the webhook between your local and your web copies of the repository. So this gives that .git directory essentially the URL that it needs, so that it can actually know where to push to. Because we haven't established the connection yet. It knows the name of the directory, but the name of the directory isn't necessarily the name of the repository. It needs to know where to push to. So that's the function of this line. And the final line then is what actually pushes your changes to your repository. And this -u origin master line is simply saying that you're pushing to the master branch. And once you do this line, you won't need to tell it that you're pushing to the master branch again. If you change branches, you can simply swap between branches, but and push from those branches. But for the sake of your first push, you have to tell it which branch you're wanting to push to. And as of yet, we only have our master branch. So I'm going to go ahead and just quick do this myself, so that I can catch up with the rest of you. So if there are any questions, and this would be a good time for questions if there are any of them in the meantime. Okay. So if there aren't any questions, I'm going to go ahead and refresh this page then. And so I have there is something in the chat. Okay. So there's one issue in the chat. It looks like if you put in the origin to begin with, the origin is there. You shouldn't need to do that again. So this line here, in principle, can go anywhere between git init and git push. So if you already ran that line once, you shouldn't need to run it again. So don't worry if you accidentally said git remote before commit or git remote add before git add readme. That shouldn't be an issue. You should be able to.
How do we get back to that quick setup page?
Once you push, it won't let you see that. It won't let you see that again.
Okay.
Let's see. I see. So Beverly, you'll want to actually put not the URL to my repository, but the URL to your repository. So that's the URL to the one that I just made, but you'll want to swap. Giganano is my username. You'll want to swap that for your username, and example.git for whatever name you made for your repository.git.
How do we check that?
I tried that again, and it didn't take that I changed it. So even when I put in my own username, it didn't accept that I changed it.
Okay, so let's see. Can you put the new command and the output in the chat, please?
Sure.
And G, to answer your question, once this page has gone, it's gone for good on this repository. But I took a screenshot of it and placed it in my example. So if you go to my example repository here, and under screenshots.
Okay.
It is one of these screenshots. I have it written down on my phone which one it is. Let's see. It's like step 3, I believe is. Yes. So here's the screenshot of this page. It is from my account, but swap your username and your repository name accordingly. But I will take everyone through another add commit push of a second file as well. It actually gets much simpler after your first one, because you don't have to add the origin again. You don't have to init. You don't have to tell it the branch. It basically just becomes add commit push. And Beverly, since so this is saying that the remote origin already exists. So go ahead and actually try to push and add and commit if you haven't already. But since the origin is there, a push command should work now.
All right.
If it gives you the error and says that it's my URL again, I can show you how to swap the origin.
Yeah, it still says it's your user.
It's mine. Okay. So you should, let's see. I just need to verify the git command one real quick. Okay. So you should be able to say, I'm putting this in the chat. So this basically, rather than adding an origin, it changes the URL. So it becomes, rather than git remote add origin, it's git remote set URL of that origin. And then this git at github.com is essentially the new URL for your repository. I believe you could place the HTTP link as well, but this is conventionally the way that they're set.
When I type that in, it says no such file or directory.
Interesting. So try the HTTP. Try the HTTP URL with that rather than the git at github.com.
Okay, so would it just be git and then that?
Yeah, so it would be, I'll put the second version in the chat just to verify, but it would be your, it would be this version.
Oh, okay.
And when you push it, it's likely it will ask for your username and password, unless you are using an account that you've already set up with potentially with an SSH key. But absent that, it should be asking for a username and password. And I clicked on the link that you sent, and it looks like it did go to your repository.
Okay, it's still saying no such file. I don't know what it is. Is there a way to just sort of like delete and start over completely?
Yes, you should be able to the directory that you created. And like the simple solution here, I think, would be to simply remove your local copy of the directory and just simply make a new one and go through the commands again.
Okay.
You shouldn't have to remove the online repository or anything. You should be able to just simply remove the directory on your computer and just make a new directory and rerun the git init command.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
James, I have the following error message when I try to push.
It looks like it's pushing with. It looks like it's pushing with a with an SSH key. Let's see. So did you set your URL to the new? It looks like you reset your URL to the git at github.com with your username. Is that correct?
Yep. Is that
Okay.
what I should do?
Let's see. That it's potential that's wanting to push with an SSH key. So try swapping it back to your HTTP version. Let's see. It could be that I am also learning something new right now. I potentially this git at GitHub syntax is for SSH keys. Let's see.
So if I swap, set my origin to be the HTTP link, and I push, I got this following error.
Okay. Changes. So try running. Try running now Git Poll, just a plain Git Poll message. I put that in the chat as well.
Git Pull.
Because it's saying that there's remote changes that you don't have locally. So usually you just have to simply pull them. It may bring up a commit file automatically.
Tracking. Looks like Git Pull runs successfully. So what should I do now?
So try pushing again.
I push again.
Is this the first time you're doing a push?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, then proceed as planned.
Still got this error.
You still got the error. So let's see. So it's possible that setting the origin, it's possible that messing with the origin before you push causes problems. That could be what's behind both yours and Beverly's issue.
Yeah, I'm gonna delete it, or I'm gonna run it on a local volume to avoid all those box thing, and yeah, I'll come back to see if I see any errors.
Yeah, so try
so I could have multiple local folders, right? But I can still commit to the same online repository on GitHub. Is that true?
Sorry, I was reading something in the chat. Can you repeat the question?
Okay. I can have multiple local folders that all point to the same online repository, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, so in the meantime, let's finish the rest of the standard setup. I want to make sure that we get through all of that, and we can finish troubleshooting at the end. So after going through the rest of the process, I just followed the setup commands as they were printed. And this is essentially what we're looking at now. We added this readme.md file, and it has and this is all that's in it. It had #example, and MD stands for Markdown. So GitHub renders that automatically into some sort of syntax. There's also RST stands for restructured text, and so if you write a restructured text file, GitHub will automatically render it in some visually pretty format. So far this is all we've got. So we added, committed, and pushed this one file. So next I'll just go through a quick demonstration of how to add a new file and commit that file and then subsequently push. And then I'll also go through how to pull if you have a local or if you have another local copy that say you want to update from. So I'm going to stop share briefly and bring up a terminal window. So this is my terminal window. I'm just in my home directory, and I made a directory here, example, for this demonstration. So we can simply cd into that directory, and now here's the contents of the repository so far. There's this .git for the local. These are the local files that tell Git what it needs to know in order to connect to your remote repository, and then this readme.md file that we made a few minutes ago, and this is its sole contents. So for demonstration purposes, I will make another directory in here, and I'll just call it some code. So I'll cd now into that directory, and as we can see, it's empty. It's a new directory. We don't have anything in it. But I'll go ahead and just make just a hello world script. Just the simplest of Python scripts, where we just simply print the message hello world, and that's it. And then I'll just simply right quit that out of that text editor. So you don't have to use Vim. The basic idea here is to just make some file. It also doesn't have to be a Python script. If you just want to put some text file in there, that's fine as well. The basic idea here is we're just going to have a file that we want to now add to our repository. So I am in my repository now, and I have this file and this directory which has this hello world.py script in it. So now the way to get this onto your remote repository is much simpler than before. You just say git add hello world.py, or whatever name of file it was. The rule of the command is you just say git add, then you tell it the file or files that you want it to add, and you hit enter. And then I'll go ahead and run git commit. I'll do it without the -m for demonstration purposes, so that people can see that. But if you want to commit with that single line command, go ahead and do so. But like I said, for this purpose, I'll just run git commit, and you'll see some file that looks like this. This is Vim. And as Matthias said in the chat, if you don't like Vim, you can specify a different text editor. I have never done that. My preferred terminal text editor is Vim. So if there are questions of how to do that, I will solicit an answer from Matthias. But now I'll just give this some commit message. I'll just say I added some code. And then I'll just write and quit the file. And if you do that, there's now the commit message that is printed by Git is there automatically after we quit the file. Then all you have to do is say git push, and it already knows that we're pushing to the master branch, and so you can just run this command as is with no extra flags, and it should go. So I'm going to stop share again briefly just to bring up the Chrome window again. So here's my online version, and if I just refresh the page, you can see now I have some directory named some code, and the file hello world.py, and it has the contents that I put in there. So I created this in another directory just to simply show that you don't have to make the new directory within GitHub. All you need is the root directory, the git init, and the add origin at the beginning. And aside from the setup process, you can create whatever directories you want on your local copy. And when you add, commit, and push files, GitHub knows what directories it needs just based on the names of the files. Right? I added that hello world file, and Git knows that the path to that file is in this some code directory, and then under hello world.py, and so you don't have to do that yourself. So it's a much simpler setup once you have the repository in place with a file there, because you can just simply then add a file, commit, and push, and you don't have to tell it what the origin is. And just as a side note, I have SSH keys attached to my GitHub. So when I ran git push, it pushed automatically to my account. If you haven't set that up, then GitHub should have asked for your username and password. If that's just a function of adding a key to your account, which can make life easier. If you don't want to enter your username and password every time you push, I can throw together some notes and eventually share them with everyone on how to set that up if you find yourself pushing to GitHub fairly frequently.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful. And my question is, how do I make sure my remote repository URL is correct? Is there a way of checking it?
So did you did you do your git remote add origin command already? And
Git remote.
Yep.
Yes, Git remote add origin. Yes, I
Okay.
did that.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if so.
Matthias beat me to the punch in the chat. If you run git remote -v, it will print the URL.
Right, I did that. So it print out it basically it writes something like this.
Mm-hmm.
But how do I know this is correct or not? Okay, so the link works. So if I click the link, all right, it goes back. Okay, so
yeah,
that's
the way I
correct.
would do that would be to simply take the URL that it has set and see if it actually opens the repository in the browser window.
So now, if I do, I got an error message if I try to do push.
Let's see. Interesting. Try. That's strange. I have not seen this. I have not seen this error before. G, can you run a? Can you run that user email again? So I'll put that back in the chat so that it's easily accessible.
User email.
Yeah, and make sure that your Gmail is what pops up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So in the meantime, I want to show people how to pull and clone a repository. Let's go back to my terminal quick. I'm gonna swap the share. So I'm back in my repository. So I'm in this directory that I simply made in my within my home directory for this repository, and I have these files in here. Now I know that my repository here, my local copy here, is already up to date. But if you are on some other computer and you know that that you push changes to GitHub that are not reflected on your local machine, you can just simply run Git Pull, just like that, and it tells me right now already up to date. But if you were behind, if there were changes that needed if essentially you needed updating, then you would see some mess of text that doesn't look too different from this. It would print some message about pulling changes, decompressing objects, etc., and then it would say now you're up to date with this branch. So that's a very simple way to then update the code on a separate machine. So rather than having to say use an SCP command or email to send these files between multiple computers, you can just simply run git pull and everything is updated automatically for you without any potential human error on your part.
So what does pull mean? Pull means you pull the repository to the local folder?
Exactly. So there's basically there's the changes can go two ways. It can go upload from local to the cloud, or it can be pulling, taking changes from the cloud to a local machine that may be behind. And that basically is just if to go one way, to push from local to cloud was what we did earlier. Was you add a file, you run a commit, and it finds the changes, and then you push to your repository.
So commit
whereas the other way,
commit doesn't update the file in the cloud. Commit is the step before you push to the cloud.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right.
But what does commit do?
So commit because this gets somewhat into the intricacies of how GitHub and its version control works, but when you add a file, you're basically telling GitHub that you're about to make a commit and that you need this file to be, you need its changes to be reflected in that commit. And then when you make a given commit, it goes and it finds all of the changes that were made since the previous commit to that file, or if it's a new file, it's just the whole file has been added, and those are the changes. And then the commit is what actually gets pushed to GitHub. It's it's not the file itself, but rather the commit. And so the commit has messages like, these lines were added to these files, these lines were taken out of these files, and so on and so on. And so even if you make only one, say, typo fix in a given file, the resultant changes in the commit will be the previous version of that line was removed and the new version was added. So it just simply goes line by line through the file and tracks additions and subtractions. And then that commit, which has all of those changes kind of stored under the hood in a pretty bow that GitHub can handle, gets pushed to the cloud. It gets sent to GitHub's server, and then it knows to update the status of your repository and the state of the files that are stored there.
So, okay. Thank you, James. So it looks like I cannot pull successfully if you see the message there.
Let's see.
Because I do make some changes on my GitHub. I see the changes. I add a picture on the GitHub, but I try to pull, it doesn't pull anything in my local directory.
Right. So you should be, this simply says that it needs a branch to pull with. It doesn't know. Just a quick question, G, did you push a change previously? I know you had a directory under your Dropbox, you said, and then you made another directory.
Right now, now I'm running on my local folder. Right. So it's the same folder name. And when I also set up the global email, it returned my Gmail.
Mm-hmm. Good.
And now
it simply needs to know which branch you want to pull from, because from this I would assume that you haven't ran the add origin command yet. Is that correct?
I think I have done it. Right. Git Remote Dash V will tell me if I have done that, right?
Yes. Well, actually, no. Sorry, no. Git Remote Dash V will tell you the URL to the repository. What it needs is the branch. So we can simply take one of these commands and tell it which branch you want to pull from. The simplest way to do this would be, I think, to take your the first one and remote. I think you should be able to just take the URL of your repository. I'm placing this in the chat right now.
Okay.
So I think I believe remote would be the URL to your repository. I'm not.
So if I do git remote add origin again, it doesn't hurt, right?
Let's see. It should already know that line shouldn't make much of a difference. I don't believe it should. I don't believe that would be the solution to this problem. It shouldn't hurt. I believe you, but that's not the solution to this problem. This problem, what's going on here is that it doesn't know which branch to pull from, since you haven't pushed from this copy of your repository.
Okay, so I didn't successfully pull, so it doesn't know.
Right.
Doesn't know.
Right.
Push.
Another way.
Okay.
Yeah, I think another way to do this. Let me check on my terminal quick. Let's see.
Yeah, so just for the interest of time, for people who want to leave, it's okay, but leave a comment on the chat. Let me and James know if you successfully set up online repository, if you successfully push or pull. Yeah, just give us some feedback so that we know like how successful this workshop is by helping people to get started. We got one success, Anderson. Great. Yeah, go ahead, James.
So G, I think you should be. So did you try that line I sent in the chat, the Git Poll with the URL master?
Git Pull.
Yeah. So I'll place it in the chat again. So try. Thanks for the success messages, everyone. Glad it went well. So simply, oh, sorry, I sent that to Josh privately. Sorry about that, Josh. Here's that command once more.
Git Pull. Oh, okay.
Yeah, another way to do this would be based on the second option, because it gave you two options with how to do this. The second is to simply just specify the branch and tell it which branch you're pushing to. So let me fill in that.
So
again.
I ran this; it was successful. So so Git Pull, the first is the online URL, and the master is the branch, right?
Right. And the reason you needed to run that was because when you run, like in the traditional setup, when you run git push origin git push -u origin master, it tells it which branch you're pushing to by saying,
right.
the dash. That's what -u origin master is. But if since you hadn't pushed, it didn't know which branch you were wanting to push or pull from. So that's what this is doing. If anyone wants to see how to clone a repository, I will show a quick example of that. And I will simply clone the source code for my chemical evolution package. The command is simply git clone, git space clone, and then you give it the URL. And that source code is stored at this URL. My username giganano, and the code is called Vice. And so you just simply give it that, and it pulls it. So if you do that, it once this clone command finishes, it looks like my internet is going a little slow, but here we go. So it will print something like this, and then you'll have a file with the name of the repository that you downloaded, and you can cd into that, and all of its contents will be in there. And and then you can make all of the changes that you need. If you have say a copy on, if this is a repository of yours that you are cloning on a separate computer, you would simply clone, and then you can say, you can set the URL as we did earlier by specifying which, if this is your repository, you shouldn't need to do anything here. But then you can add, commit, and push as you otherwise would without, and it would just simply ask for your username and password. And setting up an SSH key, you can change the URL to reflect that as well.
Yeah, I think if you could throw a note on how to create a SSH key file, that would be great. So I have a question. So I successfully pull. So I still having problem to push. So let me just share my screen here.
Sure. There was also a question in the chat asking if I could simply explain my my environment. From that was from Josh. Once we're finished with this here, Josh, I'd be happy to say a little bit about that. But basically, I'm using iTerm. It's a Mac terminal replacement. I'll track down the URL quick and place it in the chat. It's a little more flexible terminal. It allows things like split screen and tabs. So I'll place that in the chat quick, and G, go ahead and.
So okay, so now I have just add this random text in my local directory, and now I want to commit, right?
You'll need to add the file first.
Git add random.
Yep.
Text.
And then commit.
Without any additional.
It's not necessary. It'll just pull up a Vim editor if you don't, with nothing else. So that will work.
That's good.
Yep. So you'll need to place a message first. If the commit message is empty, you'll get this message here that says abort commit due to empty commit message.
So git commit second.
Sure. Place, but this requires a -m before the quote. So -m. Yep. And
space.
Yep. Then that should go.
Okay.
There you go.
All right.
And then you'll need to push. So just git push.
Origin to master.
So try it actually. So for demonstration purposes, remove origin master. Just take git push. And it does need. So it does need the upstream since. So I take it you're pushing from now the local, not Dropbox copy.
Right. Yeah. Now it's local. So.
Right. Yeah. So run this. Yeah. With this, what it places there, git push -- set upstream origin master. That should you should be able to run that as it is printed. And there you go. It pushed.
We're good?
Yep. So from here on, you shouldn't need to specify which origin you're pushing.
Right, because I already run that once. So let's check if it's being pushed. Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right. I think now I can report success.
Awesome. And let me just share screen once more. Josh was curious about iTerm. I'll just show quick some of the things that you can do with iTerm. But here are I typically have a couple different windows open. One of the nice things about iTerm is you can split screen your terminal. That's with, if you're on a Mac, it's, I think iTerm only works for Mac anyway, but the command to split screen and both horizontally and vertically is Command D and Command Shift D, and you can get multiple terminal panes on the same window. So he was curious about that, so I just wanted to show that quickly. Let me take a look at my notes quick and just make sure that there wasn't anything else I wanted to share. Let's see. Right. So one last thing worth mentioning is that files can be added with the usual terminal patterns. Like if you can specify like *.py and it will add everything with a .py extension. So the usual bash terminal commands to refer to like a collection of files can also be used in your Git Add statements. So if you are in, say, some directory within your repository, like for you can say git add asterisk, and it will add everything underneath that directory. So like if you want to add all of your changes at the end, say at the end of the day, you can go to the very top level of your repository, run git add asterisk, and it will add all of the files.
I see.
There's also an example file. So under the example repository I created, so under, let me share screen once more. We have, here's my example repository. One file worth calling out is this .gitignore. There does have to be a dot on there. But if you look at this, I've specified simply a pattern and a specific path. And what the .gitignore file does is it tells GitHub certain files that should be skipped over by your Git repository. So these are essentially files that you can keep local and not push to the remote. So by specifying, say, *.out, what this means is any file with a .out extension will never be added. And so I can say git add asterisk, and I can add everything in my repository, but everything with a .out extension will be skipped entirely. And I can also specify I can call out certain paths specifically, like this some code local script.py, and that will never be added by GitHub unless I say git add, give it this file, and I force it, and I give it, say, a -f or a -force flag to say that yes, I want to override my gitignore. But so just to say that this, if there are files that you want to keep out of your GitHub repository for some reason, maybe it's a plot that is produced which is particularly big, and you're just going to run the script on each machine that has a copy of the repository, you can add that file to your gitignore, and it will stay out of the your cloud copy.
Mm-hmm.
So gitignore is useful in that regard as well. Let's see. So I'm looking at my notes again just to make sure that there's that is so that's all of that's basically all of the material that I wanted to cover in this workshop. It sounds like folks are interested in potentially setting up an SSH key. I can put together some notes and share those potentially early next week on how to set that up. SSH keys are relatively easy to set up, but you can place they will need to go essentially in a specific place within your computer, and I'll put some instructions together on how to do that.
Awesome.
And then you should be able to add, commit, and push and pull without having to enter your username and password. And you should be able to also then do the same on other machines that have the same SSH key. So.
And one thing, James, probably last question before we conclude.
Sure.
How do you add all? You can just git add asterisk. That's all the files.
Yeah. Let me. So that's in the chat. If you're in, say, the root directory of your repository, you can run that command and it will add everything.
And since I already set up a .git ignore file, when I try to do that is that the following path are ignored by one of your git ignore files. So that's normal, right? Because you already asked the GitHub not to upload certain files, so it would want to check with you again.
Right. Yeah. If you've got paths that are on your git ignore, it will basically it will tell you, and just as a warning, that it encountered some files that it was told to ignore.
All right.
It's just a warning message, just to say, hey, if you want this file added, you'll need to add the -f flag.
Yep. Great.
And just as a precaution, make sure that you do add, commit, and push the .git ignore file as well. That's a file that you'll want to put on the repository too.
Right. Yeah, that's what I did.
Good.
All right. Thank you so much, James. I think from the response, I would say at least half of the people attendees today,
good,
have a good, successful experience. Good. The people who do not respond, we do not yet know. Matthias, are you successful in setting things up? Because I didn't see yours.
Also, if there are questions about anything, folks can feel free to email me as well. I'm happy to help people get started with GitHub.
Awesome. Good. Thank you, James. Looks like I'm the one who's having the most trouble. But this is all good. Eventually we all accomplished what we set out to do.
Yeah. GitHub is one of those things. Good question, Joshua. I'll place my email in the chat. My name.number is johnson.7419. GitHub is one of those things that has a little bit of a learning curve, but once you get going with it, the things that it does are actually fairly straightforward. When I first started, I was like, why do I need to add, commit, and push when I just simply pull on the other side? And now, after knowing or after having some experience knowing that how it treats the files for version control and what commits really are, it actually it will only make more sense. It started to make a lot of sense to me once I just looked at what commits are and realized that the notion that a commit is really just a series of pluses and minuses on lines within files, and that is what GitHub uses to track your files. That lended a lot of insight to me, at least on how Git works, and then subsequently why the process goes the way it does. But the basic components, just to kind of summarize, the basic components of a repository are a local and a remote copy, and your local copy has to know the URL and the branch that it is pushing and pulling to. If it doesn't have both of them, those processes will fail when you try to run one or the other. And then the add commit, you've got the add commit push process, which is going from local to cloud, and Poll goes from cloud to local. So you can then manage your code using some online copy and manage copies between different computers. So
Awesome. All right. I think it's time to finish today's workshop.
awesome.
Most attendees have already left. I assume that they have successful experience. But thank you, James, again for this very useful workshop.
Yeah, happy to help.
Great. All right. Bye, everyone.
Have a good day, everyone.